going on, everybody? Today, thought we'd talk a little bit about leashes. Okay, so let's get into the meat of the video. A couple things I'm not going to go over today. One is going to be your classic retractable leash or flexi leash, whatever people want to call it. The kind where you press a little button and it retracts in. So we're not going to talk about that today. Other things we're not going to go over, and this is just simply because I don't have them to talk about. Bungee leashes, so any sort of leash that contains that little bungee portion in it where it sort of softens the stretch to the dog or to the owner if you got a dog that lunges. We're also not going to cover straight chain leashes, so perhaps you've seen, big old big breed dog with a spiked collar and a big long chain on it, something like that. Some people I've seen use chain leashes because the dog likes to bite on the leash, so that's been their method of dissuading the dog from chewing on the leash. They just go with the chain leash. Today we're just going to talk about some different types of standard 6-foot leashes, and I use a 6-foot leash when training because we're going to be doing all kinds of stuff during training, and we're going to need the full 6-foot length of the leash eventually as we begin to extend our sit stays and our down stays, and when we want to take a break from heeling and allow the dog to have some room to sniff around on the grass, go to the washroom. So I just use a standard 6-foot leash. So let's jump into kind of the different leashes that I keep around and kind of what I use them for and how to pick the appropriate leash for your dog. Okay, so first of all, let's just cover your basic leashes and get that out of the way just so that we're all on the same page. Okay, so generally speaking, this is going to be a fairly straightforward 6-foot, 1-inch thick nylon heavy-duty leash with your standard bolt clasp, okay? Bolt clasps are pretty much the standard for most leashes, but some dogs, depending on the type of collar you're using, can shake this loose and get free. But that's your standard heavy-duty kind of 1-inch leash that a lot of people are using. I don't use this unless I've got a beast of a dog in, or they're very aggressive or very reactive on the leash and I need something a bit more heavy duty. I typically don't use this. One thing I'll mention right now is, for me, leashes are for the owner, not for the dog. So I have had dogs in for training and an owner says, "Oh, I noticed in the picture you're not using the dog's leash." And I just simply reply, well, because that's not the dog's leash. The dog isn't walking himself on the leash. I'm walking the dog on the leash. So I want a leash that feels good in my hands. And while we're on that note of kind of how we use a leash, I get that we're all using leashes because A, there's a leash law, and B, because most people's dogs would just kind of run away or do whatever they want without a leash on them. So a leash becomes a control mechanism for many dog owners out there, which is fine. I see the leash a little bit differently. To me, the leash is a communication tool. So I can use the leash to help steer the dog where I need them to be. I can help use the leash to put the dog into a sit. I can help use the leash with a little bit of a little pop or something, a little bit of feedback to communicate to the dog. So I see a leash as a tool that communicates to the dog where I need them to get their attention, or if they've made a mistake, something like that. Okay, but that's how I'm using the leash. Okay, so that's your standard kind of heavy duty, right? This is a nylon leash. I've also used quite a few soy leashes in the past, so this would be a 1-inch soy leash, okay? Typically I use 1/2-inch leashes, so that's the thickness there, if you can see, of a 1/2-inch leash, okay? So I like 1/2-inch leashes. Why? Because, whoops, got a knot in my leash. Hey, there's something else let's talk about. If you get a knot in your leash, just undo the knot. Now, I understand some people put a knot in their leash so they kind of have a spot where their hand sits better for better control. That's fine. I don't like knots in my leashes, so I immediately take them out. I like to take care of my leashes. So this is a 1/2-inch soy leash. This is not really a good leash to train a dog on. I use them for my dogs because the feel of soy is kind of like cotton and it just feels nice in my hand. So if I've got a nut, like with my dogs, I have 3 dogs. And you can imagine if I had this on all 3 dogs, 3 of these leashes bunched up in my hand at once is going to be too much. It's just going to feels too bulky in my hand. So with these guys here, nice and light. Now the reason I say they're not appropriate to start training a dog on is because there's a bit of give to this. Okay, so if you use your leash, you want to give a little bit of feedback to the dog. It's a little bit springy and it's not my favorite. It's hard to get good, snappy, crisp leash work with a soy leash, but because my dogs are trained and don't even need leashes to walk, I can use these because they feel nicer in my hands, okay? These will get dirty over time, and we actually just throw them in the washing machine and wash them. Now, so let's talk real quick about the different sizes of leashes here, okay? And what's appropriate. So this is a small breed leash, okay? So make sure you're matching your leash to your dog. That would seem like common sense, but it's not. I see a lot of tiny, small breed dogs on leashes like this, okay? So we're more talking about the clasp size when we're dealing with the size of the dog. And you can imagine if we put this on Ollie, not so good, right? He's gonna be all weighed down with this big, heavy clasp. So that's why we use something like this, okay? Something nice and small and light for a little guy like Ollie. And this is kind of a standard 1/2 inch leash. Now, some people might also say like, "Whoa, my dog would break a clasp on this." Well, if your dog's pulling so hard that they would break this clasp, then your problem is not leash selection. Your problem is probably that you should train a bit more with your dog so that they don't pull on the leash. So a bigger, stronger leash shouldn't be the answer to a dog that pulls. That's just maintaining and kind of controlling the behavior. It's not eradicating the behavior. So if your problem is you need a big, heavy leash because your dog's a puller, teach your dog not to pull, and then you could use a nice little light leash like this, okay? But that's your standard leashes and clasps. This is a biothane leash. So biothane is a type of material. It feels it's just basically kind of like a rubbery sort of material. Very sturdy leashes. They're great for wet weather use. Some people just use them all the time. I got them in for winter use. Because our little soy leashes here, these will absorb water out in the rain or in the snow, where these guys won't. These are nice, light 1/2 inch leashes, which I really like, but the downside to these is they've got a nice brass clasp, but for me, these brass clasps are a bit heavy, and that's why I tend not to use these very much. It might be hard to see, but there's a little crack forming. So once this biothane dries out, it can be a problem too. But it is nice and grippy, so if you're using gloves in the winter, this will actually provide a better grip. If you do need better grip, you can always get a leash like this. So these are actually cotton leashes, which again feel really nice in the hand. But they have this little rubber printing on them, which makes them really grippy, so that if you're afraid your dog's going to slip out of your hands, you could go with something like this. Again, the downside to something like this, it would soften up over time, but initially when it comes in, it's a bit firm for me. I like really soft leashes. You also won't see a leather leash in here. I don't really use leather products, and I just don't like the way leather feels in my hands. So I have nothing against a leather leash. If that's what you like to use, kudos, more power to you. I just don't use leather leashes. But these are the printed non-slip leashes. Also have this if I've got a really difficult dog who is shaken out. So on small link prong collars, the little D-ring can be so fine that a dog will shake it and it will pop off of the leash. So sometimes I find these leashes to be a bit more appropriate. This has got a locking carabiner on it. Okay, and this one here I can thread up so that once it's attached to the leash, it can't ever pop open. The problem with this though is your collar has to have a swivel piece here, because this does not swivel. So if you don't have a swivel on your collar, you won't be able to use something like this, because the leash and the collar are going to get all twisted. Okay, and that's a rope leash. Some people make their own rope leashes too, but that's a pretty sturdy rope leash, and this here would be bomb-proof if you had a big beast of a dog in. The last thing I'll show you guys, it's not something that I use very often, so this is called a slip lead. I'm sure everybody's seen this. It's basically a leash and collar all in one. So the way this works is you slip it over the dog's neck. It's got this little piece here, which you can adjust so that it prevents the slip lead from over tightening on the dog's neck. Okay. And we've got a little leather piece here, which you would set up to prevent the collar from opening too much and then being able to slide off the dog. So I do use these sometimes for getting dogs in and out of a crate, or if I'm just taking a dog out for a quick pee. This can be a lot easier to slip on and just take the dog out without having to get a leash and collar on. So that's typically the way I use these though, but it's not a training collar for me. This isn't something that I would use regularly to walk or train a dog on. It's very, very clunky and very hard to give feedback on this. Again, if you have a dog that doesn't even require a leash, just kind of walks at your side and saunters along, hey, maybe you use this all the time because he doesn't require a lot of feedback using the leash and collar. Okay, so that's my video on leashes. Not too much to touch on, but the big takeaway here, make sure you're matching the clasp and the leash size to the dog so that it's not too heavy for some dogs or it's not too insufficient and light for other dogs. But really when you're considering a leash, maybe you want to pick one with a funky pattern on it so that it looks cool with your dog, a little camo or some flowers, whatever it is, that's all cool too. But just remember, the leash is for you. The leash is going to be in your hands, so pick a leash that feels nice in your hands, that you like. So next time you're at the store, don't just think about, oh, this would look really good with my dog's collar or my dog's jacket. Pick something, put it in your hands, feel it, bend it around, hold it in one hand, like see how it feels to you because it's your leash. You're the one that's going to have the leash in your hands. The only thing that attaches to the dog is the clasp, so make sure that the clasp is the right weight for your dog and everything's appropriate. Okay, so hopefully you got a little bit out of that video. Leashes aren't just leashes, there's a lot to them. See you later.